If you're living in Japan, you have a choice to make. Settle in for the long run and retire here, or leave before it's too late. I've been in Japan for 23 years now. I came here when I was 21, and I think it might be too late for me. It's very likely that I will stay here, retire, and spend the rest of my life in Japan. And there are lots of reasons to stay, and a few reasons not to. Okay, let's look at 9 reasons why you might want to retire in Japan. First reason is cost of living. Japan is now considerably cheaper than some other countries. When I first came here in 2000, Japan still had an expensive image, and lots of things here were more expensive than the UK, where I came from. Now, 23 years later, the position is completely different. When I go back to the UK, when I go to Europe, when I visited Australia, I was shocked at how much stuff cost, because prices in Japan have largely not changed while I've been here. Prices in other countries have doubled or tripled in that time. Second reason is healthcare and nursing care in Japan is pretty good and very reasonable. So we did a video about healthcare a few weeks ago. You can check that out from the link in the description. But basically in Japan, especially senior citizens, don't have to pay very much for national health insurance, and the coverage is pretty reasonable. As you get older, your copay will go from 30% to 20%, even 10%, depending on your income. Nursing care like home helpers or daycare facilities or even residential facilities are all available through a subsidized public system that everyone starts paying into when they reach the age of 40. We're going to do a video about this in the future. So reason number 3, Japan is a relatively peaceful society compared to UK or Europe or North America. There's very little violence here, and it's a relatively safe place to live. Reason number 4, the status of the elderly in Japan is probably the best of most countries I've been to. Being old in Japan is relatively comfortable. People are polite and helpful towards you, and that's not always the case in some other countries that I have experience with. So if I looked at various countries that I've lived in, the place where I would most like to be old is probably Japan. You see people in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, they're still active, they're still part of their local community, and this goes a long way to explaining why Japanese people live quite so long and why they remain active for so much of their life. Reason number 5, Japan has a relatively competent government. So I really felt this myself after the 3/11 earthquake and disaster. So I live in Sendai, which was at the epicenter of the 3/11 earthquake. We had massive damage and destruction up here, and the government response was very, very encouraging. It was fast, it was effective, people kind of pulled together, and society worked relatively well, and that gave me a lot of hope for the future as well. Reason number 6, Japan is an island nation that is relatively easy to defend with strong borders. I think this is going to be an important factor for the rest of this century because of mainly climate-based mass migration that we're going to see in the future. Reason number 7, Japan has fairly good natural resources, especially once we change over to renewable energy. Right now, Japan imports a lot of its food, but I think this is something that can be retooled in the future, and we'll see domestic food production rise to meet demand. Reason number 8, food. I love the food here. I think the quality and the price and the range of food that we have here in Japan is incredible. It's very easy to eat healthily here in Japan. I think that's going to make a huge difference to how healthy people can stay and how long they will remain active and healthy in retirement. And reason number 9 is lifestyle. I find that people here are much more active. Japan is very walkable. There's good public transport. There's good access to shops and so on, regardless of where you live. And I really like the lifestyle here. here. Of course, not everything is perfect in Japan, and there are plenty of reasons why you might want to reconsider if you've decided to retire here. I have 5 reasons, and the first one is language. If you are not completely fluent in Japanese, if you're not comfortable navigating any kind of social situation that you might encounter here in Japan, I think that might be a big problem in retirement. So last year I had a hospital stay for about 4 weeks, and for me that was kind of a trial run. So can I survive in a Japanese language environment, in a very Japanese cultural environment, so with the hospital food and with the hospital rules and dealing with other patients and dealing with the administration. It's kind of a trial run for being in a nursing home, and I found that was actually okay. I had a reasonable time, the food was fine, I made friends with some of the nurses and some of the other patients, and I think the stay was pretty successful. But if you don't have that level of Japanese and that level of cultural comfort here, it might be tricky for you as you get older. So maintaining friendships, making new friends, being in a daycare facility, for example, or a residential facility is going to be incredibly stressful if you don't have the language skills. Even stuff like figuring out how to claim your pension, your nenkin, applying for nursing care like kaigo hoken, going to the doctor, and all these things that we have to do in Japanese where we might not have the support of the people who have supported us so far. Second reason is similar. So are your family and friends here? Because if they're not, then retirement could get lonely. Particularly as we get older, we become less able to travel, and so it's quite easy to become more and more isolated as you get older, particularly if you don't have the language skills, but also if you don't have that support network. Being in Japan by yourself and lonely is going to be very different from being in Japan, having friends and family around you. Third reason is demographics. So demographics is going to have an enormous effect on Japan. We're already starting to see that, where restaurants, for example, can't get enough workers and so are unable to provide the same level of service they had before, or even in some cases unable to stay open. And we're going to see this more and more across Japanese society. So things that we took for granted, like having hospitals staffed adequately, having shops open and working, having restaurants available all over the place, it's going to be more difficult in the future. Recently, we've been trying to get some work done on our mansion. So I want to renovate one of the rooms, and it's been really hard because a lot of the construction companies don't have enough staff to do all the jobs that they're offered, and they're choosing to do more lucrative jobs rather than the kind of thing that we want to get done. So we've actually not been able to find someone to do that renovation work for us. And I can see this being a problem much more in the future. How will demographic change impact Japan? I don't know. It's a very big unknown, and we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. Reason number 4 is accommodation. So if you don't own your home, we've seen some articles recently about the difficulty that elderly people can have when trying to rent a home. It's very difficult to do so. Now, if you combine that with being non-Japanese, which is also a reason why some people have difficulty renting things, you might find it is very difficult to find a home as you get older unless you own it already. And the 5th reason is getting a visa or getting permission to stay. Really, the only safe visa categories are being a permanent resident or even naturalizing. I would not be comfortable retiring here if I didn't have either of those 2 statuses. If you have a spouse visa and your spouse passes away, you no longer have the right to remain in Japan. There might be an option to change to a long-term resident visa under some circumstances, but not always. And again, I wouldn't rely on the kindness of bureaucrats in old age. So what do you think? Which side of this argument are you most swayed by? Personally, I think Japan has a lot of positives that outweigh the negatives or the possible risks that we'll face in the future. But I could be wrong. And of course, it's not just Japan that's facing an uncertain future. Other countries are too. We have climate change, we have societal change, we have the rise of AI, AI and the immense transformation that is going to wreak across the globe, and it's very hard to see what's going to happen in the future. So what are your plans? Are you going to stay in Japan? Are you making plans to leave? I really think the way the economy is going, if you intend to leave Japan, it might be better to do so sooner rather than later, because if you wait too long, you're not going to be able to afford to. I've thought about this for my wife and me, and for us to move back to the UK, if we wanted to, we'd end up taking quite a big hit to our quality of life if we were spending the same amount of money. So if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe, please leave us a comment with your ideas. Did I miss anything on the positive or the negative side? And what are you planning to do? Are you going to be here for good, or are you making plans to leave?